Hello, anybody there?
Hi. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, I can. I can see you and hear you. Good morning? Good morning, good afternoon?
It is barely morning, yes.
Okay, goodness.
Hi, I'm Bronwyn.
Hi, Bronwyn. Wonderful to meet you. I'm Jaime. So, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
It's fun to connect with people on Twitter.
Absolutely. It is the most random thing, isn't it?
I know. It really is.
But listen, I'm very appreciative of your time. I know that it's a busy world out there, but if you're okay, do you mind if we get the ball rolling with a few questions?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So let's start at the beginning just to get a sense of where you come from and what your context is. Can you tell me a bit about where you grew up, maybe where you're from?
Sure. So I'm from Sonoma County in the Bay Area in California. And I am sixth generation born in San Francisco. So we've been here a long time. And I'm a teacher, and I taught in Oakland, which is what my books are about. And I already forgot what else you wanted to know.
a little bit of your childhood. Let's go back there and see what that was like.
Okay, so I have two siblings. I'm the oldest, and my parents. This is my interesting fun fact. My parents both came from very wealthy Marin County families, and then they became a diesel mechanic and a preschool teacher, and so we grew up working class. But we were the first ones on either. Well, we're definitely the first ones on my mom's side of the family. They were in the social register. They were high society San Francisco. And, you know, I had student loans till I was 45. So I have a little bit of a unique downward economic trajectory.
Yeah.
We grew up in Petaluma. We had lots of pets. I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher, but I always worked with kids. And then my senior year of college, I just decided to go for it. And everyone says, oh, yeah, ever since you were a little kid, we knew you were going to be a teacher. And I was like, but okay, no one told me. I didn't know that.
Did you have a sense of that change in your family from an early age? Did you know that your family came from money? Was that ever a sticking point in conversations?
Yes, it really was. So the short version of the story is not only did my parents choose, occupations that did not make any money, but my family was all very wealthy Marin County artists, and my grandfather had a real estate. My great grandfather founded a real estate company. He was the first person in Marin County to have a private pool. Like, that's the level of wealth.
Wow.
And my grandfather was an alcoholic and lost it all. And so we had this very interesting, like my mother's generation and above, all still lived like they were incredibly wealthy to the day they died. And some of them were more so than others. My parents started budgeting. And so my parents are, they did okay because they got responsible. They started budgeting. Other people in my family, not so much. So it was always, I think it took decades for my mom to like realize that, she lived in this new world. Yeah.
So as you're going into college and you feel like you're getting settled into your adulthood, what is it that led you to education or that track?
It's a great question. I wasn't going to, so I changed my major a number of times. I was first major in biology, wanted to be a scientist. And then I realized that I really enjoyed science and I was very good at it. But the actual life of a scientist in labs, I got bored. It wasn't challenging in the way I wanted. So I did an internship at a fourth grade classroom, and that was kind of what I wanted. And I did not for a second think about the financial ramifications of becoming a teacher. And I should have. And then, I did another internship, and then I just sort of had morphed into, that was now my plan. And I did my student teaching in Sacramento, and I got my first teaching job in Oakland at 24 years old. Yeah.
Wow. So that's sort of the basis of what you're writing about then, or what you started to put together in your work. Can you tell me a bit about that time period? Because it seems like it's a huge cultural clash. There's a lot of things that are going to be transforming your perspective in that period of your life. Could you set the stage for that? Like, what was your expectation and how was it transformed by those experiences?
Right. I'm going to be quite honest, and I'm not proud of this. My expectation was that I was a young, idealistic white woman who was going to save children of color. And I like to be honest about that. Well, I don't like it. It's embarrassing, but I am honest about that, I think, because I think more of us need to claim that. And, you know, I have changed and I have grown in large part thanks to the community that I was working in educating me. But that's a very common thing. And I don't think that we do anyone any favors if we pretend it's not. And I went through the regular credential program, but Teach for America, you see this a lot. You know, a lot of different programs, you know, you're sort of going to run in there and save the kids. And, you know, that, you're not going to be a good teacher if that is what you do. But that was, you know, I had always liked working with kids. And then I think when I started teaching in Sacramento, you know, I grew up in, the area I grew up in was very split white and Latino, but at that point, all the Latino kids were, tracked into the ESL program. So I didn't have anyone in my classes who, I mean, I have very few people who weren't white in my classes. And so I was very much used to just looking like everybody else in the room. And then when I started student teaching in Sacramento, I started thinking like, oh, there are people who don't look like me, you know? And then when I started teaching in Oakland, it was, oh, I've never been the only white person in a room before. You know, this is a whole different thing. And there was a lot of growth that happened in my end, but that would have been better if it had happened not in a room of, you know, first graders, because they deserved better. Yeah.
So do you think that things have changed? Because this was a little while back. So I'm curious if you feel that as an educator, things have improved in recent years with those kinds of adjustments in the education system, where they're providing perhaps more tools for educators in those situations.
I think it's changing for the better. I think it's changing slowly. When I started teaching, I think it was 82% of American public school teachers were white. Now I think it's maybe 76 or 77. So, you know, it's not great, but it's trending a little better. I think there probably are, I haven't been to a teaching credential program since my own. But I think there are probably more, that we're learning. The entirety of my, you know, we had a class that was, you know, multicultural education. And literally the only thing I remember from it were that we learned that in some Asian cultures, it's rude for children to make eye contact with adults. And that in some cultures, they won't be able to make the same sounds because, you know, just like many white Americans can't roll their R's, you know, many like that kind of thing. And that's it. I mean, I was completely not prepared. I mean, it's embarrassing, you know, can I tell you a story about that sort of sums up my first year?
Absolutely.
My first year, to set the stage, my first year, I came in January, and, you know, schools start in August or September. And they had a teacher who quit at the beginning of the year, and then they'd had 6 substitutes. So by the time I came in, you know, they couldn't remember my name. They, you know, just were so over having different teachers. And so my first month teaching was Martin Luther King Day, which is a big thing in elementary school. And I mean, it's embarrassing. The only things we learned, like sort of in my student teaching, was basically what you do for Martin Luther King Day is you give everyone a picture of his face and they color it. And then you can all write your own I Have a Dream speech, right? I was 24 years old. I'd been a teacher for 2 weeks. I was like a little panicked because I'd never been the only white person in a room before. And, you know, my idealistic self was saying that shouldn't matter. And I'm like, oh, wait, but it feels different, you know. And this kid said, teacher, because they hadn't learned my name yet, you know, teacher, what did Martin Luther King do? And I said, well, he made it so black kids and white kids can go to school together. And I will never, ever forget this 6-year-old. She just sighed like, ugh. And she goes, teacher, black kids and white kids do not go to school together.
Oh, man.
And I looked around the room and I realized our school, at that point, we had 1,100 kids in our school. We didn't have any white kids. We had Black kids, we had Latino kids, some of whom, could pass for white, but were definitely, Latino. And we had Southeast Asian kids. And I sort of, stopped. And this other kid said, and, they were so sweet. They're trying to help me out, This other kid said, yeah, there's three kinds of kids. There's Black kids, there's Mexican kids, and there's Chinese kids. And then all the Vietnamese kids in my class said, don't call us Chinese. And I'm sort of looking around and in shock, and they just start having this conversation. I mean, kids are amazing, right? And this other kid goes, well, there's white teachers there, though, so there has to be white kids somewhere, because basically they grow into white teachers. And so they just start having, and I just sat there and thought, I am not prepared. They deserve better. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody prepared me for this. Like, how do I explain? Because obviously, we don't have legal segregation anymore in schools, but, I hadn't thought about that. So that was the kind of thing that, I processed this, I grew, I became a better teacher, but I shouldn't, the 6-year-old should not have had to educate me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it seems that emotionally that must have taken a toll on you. You were trying to figure out what the next steps were going to be. And if there was maybe I don't want to say a checklist, but maybe things that you figured out along the way that made things work for you so that you could be a better educator in that situation. What happened there? What did that change look like for you?
I think it, some of it was very broad, like, white people do not know better than other people, which, should sound really obvious and people should know that, but, you don't as someone who grows up in this white bubble. And even though, like I said, even though we had been working class, and I thought I fell into that trap of, not thinking I had white privilege because we struggled with money. And, I started realizing the difference with that, especially when we go on field trips and the transit driver would treat me very differently than they'd treat the parents who were chaperones and that kind of thing. So just the whole white privilege understanding, but then other little things like, well, maybe not little, I learned to listen to the parents, sure, I was maybe the expert in education, but they were the expert on their child, and it didn't matter if they didn't have a high school education or they didn't speak English or they weren't a citizen or they, I thought they weren't parenting right. They knew their kid better than anybody else. And that was just life changing to have that click for me. And I could tell also once I started realizing that the parents treated me differently. Like we were on team and I wasn't, the adversary, we were a team.
Yeah.
Also I think something that, when you're teaching quote unquote inner city kids, or what we say now is, kids in underserved populations. Sometimes it's easy to forget that they're kids and it's easy to think of them as sort of, statistics and potential tragedies. And they're just funny. I mean, kids are just as funny as hell, they're hilarious. And so to hold that, there was one year I had a child who saw her dad shot and killed in second grade, saw her dad shot and killed, was dealing with that PTSD, but also kids were just the funniest things in the world because they're kids still, and so that is just this crazy dichotomy to have to hang on to.
Absolutely. So I hope that I'm not prying on this too much because sometimes it can be tricky to talk about specifics of certain situations, but I'm curious if there was an experience that you may have had with a parent at some point in time where you had a eureka moment or something clicked that made you feel like you had made a breakthrough in understanding, if there was something that you feel comfortable sharing.
Oh my gosh, this is, yeah. And if this were like a TV show or something, it would be like too expository. I mean, it's so, so and I actually didn't put this in my book because I forgot about it and remembered it later. But this is, and again, a lot of these stories do not put me in a good light, but I like to share them because I think we need to learn. And so I think it was my second year of teaching. I was teaching third grade, and I had this child who was, I don't even remember his name, but I remember his mom's name. His mom's name was Linda. And this was, a very long time ago. The child's probably 30 years old now. And he was a larger Black boy, third grade it's funny, third grade, you can have these little tiny kids, and then you can have these kids that look like they're in middle school. He was in the larger end, and he was angry a lot. And, we had been working on that a lot, the calming down, the like, what do you need to do to take care of yourself, all this stuff. And I wrote on his report card comments, that he had, we had been working together on his anger issues, and he was doing better. And the mom came to me, and she said, and she was so kind. And that made the difference, because I think, knowing myself, if she'd come in angry, I think I would have gone defensive and gone straight to the, favorite liberal white person line, which is, I'm not racist. How dare you, And she came in and she said, Ms. Harris, I really want to talk to you about his report card. I'm really worried that you said he has anger issues. And I said, well, he does. And I did get a little defensive, he does. But we're working on him. He's getting better, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I don't think you understand how this could follow a Black boy around, because report cards, and I don't know if people not in education know this, report cards go in a cumulative folder. They follow you till 12th grade. Any teacher can look up, previous years. And she said, once a Black boy gets labeled as angry, like that could be it for him. And I think I wouldn't, looking back, I wouldn't blame her if she had been angrier or less kind, but she was so kind that it cut through all my defensiveness, and I totally listened. And now I completely get it. And then, that was the first time I'd ever thought about it. And she just, I'm forever in debt to Linda for, I probably would have gotten there someday, but, she saved me a lot of steps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it seems like if there is a willingness there to work together, and she could probably clearly tell that you were looking to make those inroads as well, to try to make those changes or be understanding. Because there are some folks who, in those positions of power, may not feel like they should make certain adjustments. Right. So that was really wonderful to see. So in terms of like starting to make inroads in terms of your writing and how that sort of fits into the fuller picture of your life, had you always considered that you were going to be writing about this in some capacity, or how does that play into the picture?
So I hadn't. I actually, what made me start writing it is that I had friends who didn't believe me. And my first book is called Literally Unbelievable because of this, because a friend sat me down. Most of my friends were middle-class white people, and who had gone to, middle-class white schools. And when I'm telling them things like, we had an attempted kidnapping and the police didn't show up, which is true. And, just all these, that we didn't have, there were, we had lockdowns. This was before, lockdowns and gun violence was common. And one of my friends said to me, she said, look, I feel like I can't believe you. She said, not because you're not a truthful person, but because what you're telling us is literally unbelievable. And I said, but it's true. And she said, you need to start writing it down. You need to start documenting it. And so, that became the title of the first book. And I just started a blog, and I changed all the names. And it's interesting because, it depends on who I talk to. When I talk to white Americans, they do have trouble believing it. And when I talk to most other demographics, they go, oh, yeah, of course. Like, what do you mean people didn't know that about various stories in the book? So I mostly started writing it down because people weren't believing me and I wanted to document it. So then I had this blog, and then people kept saying, I didn't show it to everybody, I didn't show it to coworkers and stuff. And people kept saying, you should make this into a book. You should make this into a book. And it took me about 10 years to change all the blog stuff into a book. And some of that was just because, I'd be working on it for a while, and then I'd find out that a former student died. And, he died because he was trying to get out of a gang, and, they shot him. And, he was one of my favorites, and he'd had just the hardest childhood. He was finally starting to get his life together. And, so I'd put it down for a year. And then I finally, when it was like almost ready to go, I found all the students I still could, who I was in touch with. It wasn't that many, but I found the ones who still could. And I said, basically, I'm writing about this. I've changed all the names, but, is it okay to share this story or that story or whatever with all the details changed? And one of them said, no, absolutely not. And I checked out all of her stuff out. I was like, okay, it's your life. It's, and part of me was like, oh, but I changed the name. Maybe I shouldn't have asked her. No, it's her life. She doesn't. And the others all said yes. and one of them said, "Miss Harris, we've been waiting our entire lives for someone to listen to our stories." And, so that was, still, and she's, I still talk to her every once in a while. She's in her early 30s. She's a guidance counselor at her old high school.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah. She's really special.
So
I finally made it into a book.
Yeah. This brought up a quick question in my mind about how those relationships have been fostered with folks. It's very difficult. I'm sure educators see a lot of kids, especially once they've been in there for a while in the game.
Right.
How were you able to do that, to just kind of manage those relationships and stay in touch? And I guess maybe what I'm curious about is how you go from maybe a place when you first started that was pretty contentious to actually finding a foothold on how to get through to kids.
Well, one of the big things was that people left there's a huge turnover in my school. So once I hit 2 years, the parents would start saying, "Oh, Miss Harris has been there forever." I was 26. They're talking about me like I've been there 50 years. And because 2 years, somehow no one, a lot of people didn't make it 2 years. By the time I was there 8 years, my last year, I was there for 8 years total. And I wanted to stay, but my health just suffered a lot from all the stress. Not of the kids, of the adults. And by the time I was there, my 8th year, I was 31. I was the senior teacher. I was not the oldest teacher, but I was the teacher who had been at that school the longest. And so the longevity helped. And then parents would start, just because they knew I was there and I was a known quantity, they'd start requesting their younger kids to be in my class. So I'd get, multiple kids in the same family or cousins or whatever. So I'd get to know the parents. And, and I just never changed my cell phone number. So, I had there was one time I had this kid, the one who said I couldn't use her stories. So I will not tell you any of their stories, but this part I'm allowed to share is, she was, in my 3rd grade class, and, she, I kept in touch when she was in 4th grade and 5th grade because she was at the same school, and then we lost touch. And then, years later, I got a text from her saying she was graduating with 4.0 from high school.
Oh.
So every once in a while you get that, but a lot of them I just, I'd sort of check in on them like, "Hey, how are you doing in middle school? How are you doing in high school?" Every once in a while they'd be like, "Hey, can you look over," I mean, not very many of them went to college, but every once in a while, "Can you look over my college application essay?" And some of them, social media, a few, not a lot. Some of them I've met their kids. It's one of them, the one who, asked me to look over her college application essays. She went to Howard. She graduated from Howard with honors. She went to Johns Hopkins. She got a master's and she got her teaching credential. And now she's a teacher. She's the head of the science department at a school in San Francisco. And, I see her and she's a kid, and every once in a while, I'll text her and ask how her kid is and how teaching is. And she's like, "Miss Harris, you have no idea how badly we need Black teachers." And I'm like, "I'm so glad you went into this, Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because, of course, I want to talk about sort of putting together the book and a couple of questions there. But I'm curious of what you feel the state of teaching is, especially in those at-risk communities, and sort of what ideally needs to happen in order for some communities to move forward with the type of help that they need.
Right. We need to pay teachers more. We need to pay teachers a lot more because people don't go into teaching because they know they won't be able to survive. I mean, I can't go back to teaching because I left the classroom because of health issues. I fully intended to go back. And once you stop moving up on the salary scale, I can't afford it now. I could afford it if I either had a wealthy spouse, family money, or I lived in housing with a bunch of roommates. I'm 47. I don't want to live with roommates. I'm not married. I don't have family money. I can't go back. And so and a lot of, and I totally understand more marginalized communities, if you go through and you get a college degree and a graduate degree, do you want to go into something that's going to make it hard for you to live on your wages? No, you want to pick a different profession. So we need to pay teachers a lot more. And that's a huge one, huge. And we need to listen to educators of color because they, I think, have a lot more answers than I do. and have not been listened to, and students of color. Mm. And what I've noticed in my teaching career is we go, oh, Black kids are so resilient. This is awesome. That's great. And we move on. Well, they shouldn't have to be resilient. You know, kids shouldn't have to live in violent areas. They shouldn't have to go to schools that have lockdowns all the time. They shouldn't have to go to schools like mine where everyone with seniority transfers to a different school, and so they get all the brand new teachers. And, you know, so in a way, even though I've written 2 books, I don't think I'm the person with the answers. And my answer is we need to listen to other people. And white people do not like to listen to other people, and people in power do not like to listen to teachers or students. But, you know, people like Stephanie is there were a couple of times I was invited to a panel to speak, and I said, actually, and I talked to Stephanie before I volunteered her, but I said, that's my student who was my Black student who's a teacher now. And I said, would you like to be on the panel? Not me, because I don't want them to listen to me. I want them to listen to you.
That's incredibly admirable, because it takes a lot. I mean, it really takes a lot to say, you know, yes, I'm knowledgeable on the topic, but at the same time, we need to get to the source. We need to figure out, where those voices are, and who we should listen to. It's funny because
it feels a little bit like a cop-out, like I'm not giving you an answer, you know, so I don't know if I'd call it admirable, because it feels like I'm sort of passing the buck, but you know, we've listened to only white people for a very long time.
But it seems like you're still doing your part. You're still part of the conversation, because you're writing your books and you're getting this information out there, your perspective. But the thing that is more difficult is to go the extra mile and say, here's my spot. Have somebody of that particular community take the stage and do the right thing there. So I applaud that. But let's talk about the book and the process of doing this, because you did this on your own, and you have a very specific reason that you chose to do that, right? You had mentioned that something led you to do that on your own. If you could share that with me. Right.
So I've actually written 2 books, and I'll tell you about the second. The second was a collaboration with a former student. The first one, there's a lot of stuff that is very difficult to talk about, and very, you know, sometimes it's embarrassing saying, you know, I came in as an idealistic white person who wanted to save children of color. And I didn't want anyone toning that down. And if I said anything wrong, I wanted to own that. And, you know, I wanted to have responsibility for every one of my words. And I know that if you get into a publishing contract with a publisher, you know, that may or may not happen. So I self-published. I did, you know, query with a few agents at first, and what I got consistently was, this book made me cry. It needs to be published. It's not my forte. You know, no one wants to buy teacher memoir. Like, you know, even Anne Lamott, do you know the author Anne Lamott?
Yes.
She's amazing. She read my book. She gave me an amazing quote that I, of course, immediately put on the back of the book, but she said, talk to my agent. Her agent said no. Her agent, I was like, you can say no to Anne Lamott, like, you know, but you know, then I think about it, and things, I just don't want anything watered down, because it's really uncomfortable. A lot of the things to face as white people, like, you know, this is what I did wrong. This is what you know, I was an idiot my first month of teaching, and I told the kids that, yay, Martin Luther King made schools desegregated, and they schooled me. You know, I didn't want any of that made more palatable. And then the second book. So what happened was, in my first book, I have 2 chapters that are dedicated to just one individual student. And one of them is the child who died. And that is a whole, you know, very sad story. And another one is dedicated to, or written about, a child who I call Jorge, who who I had lost touch with at that point when I was writing the book. He is sort of the embodiment of the school to prison pipeline. I mean, he said to me at one point, he said, how do I learn to be good? And I said, what? You know, he's 8 years old. And he said, well, other people, and he, you know, a very difficult family situation. The short version is that his mom came to the U.S. as a toddler because her mom, who I'm now friends with, his grandma, was fleeing El Salvador. And so, you know, his mom was stuck in this, you know, she didn't know El Salvador, but she was, undocumented here. And she had a very serious substance abuse problem and had him when she was 14. So, just a lot of issues there. And he was kind of trying to be the adult in his family. And he said, how do I learn to be good? Because the other kids have someone to teach them how to be good, and I just have to do it myself.
Oh, God.
That kind of like thoughtful, interesting, amazing person.
Yeah.
And so he just he fought that school to prison pipeline as hard as he could. And then in 8th grade, he saw his friend murdered in front of him. And, it went right into the gang threatened to retaliate. The Oakland police took him straight to the shooter's door and made him, identify the shooter who's 13. And so they, said, okay, well, we're putting out a hit on you. And so he joined the rival gang to protect his family, which makes perfect sense, especially if you're 13, especially if the police won't listen. And, his life went downhill. And I had sort of, after being his teacher, I had sort of been a mentor to him, and he completely lost touch with him. He started, he'd call me and leave, and just say, like, curse at me, get out of my life, So I'd lost touch with him, and I wrote this chapter. And as I wrote the chapter, I thought, gosh, I wonder what happened to him. And I was really scared to look because I assumed what had happened to him.
Yeah.
And he has a, fairly unusual last name. So I looked him up, and he had been about 2 months after he turned 18. So he was tried as an adult. He had been arrested for an attempted drive-by shooting, he was the driver, and someone had attempted to shoot a police officer. And thank goodness the shooter had very bad aim and didn't hurt anybody. But, they both went in prison. They had a gang enhancement and a gun enhancement. He was going to be in prison for 19 years. And I found him. He was in San Quentin. And I, sorry if this is too long, but
no,
the story is like,
yeah.
Okay. So I had a reporter friend who helped me find him, and I called San Quentin and I said, because you can't write to people without a prisoner number, and I said, I need a prisoner number. And she said, okay, I need the birth date. And I said, okay. And somehow I remembered, because his birthday is one day off from a holiday. So I remembered his birthday.
Wow.
But I couldn't remember the year exactly, because I couldn't remember which year I'd had him in class. And I said, okay, his birthday is this. And I said, it's either 95 or 96. I don't remember. And she goes, sorry, ma'am, can't help you with that year. And she's about to hang up. And I said, please, this was my 3rd grade student. And there's total silence. The San Quentin lady said, okay, I'll look up every year in the 90s on this date. And she gave me his prisoner number, and I wrote to him, and I said, hi, do you remember me? And he wrote back, and he said, oh my God, I thought about you all the time because I treated you so bad because I was so scared. And this is what's happened. I want to say it was maybe 2 years after he had been arrested. This is what happened since I've seen you last. And what happened was his mom had died in a fire. He had left the gang when he got to prison, which is incredibly dangerous. Basically, I'm not an expert, but what he told me is you walk in the gang and you're supposed to, they say affiliation, and he's supposed to say, the gang name. And he said, I'm a dropout. And they put you in solitary confinement because that puts a target on your back for everybody. And then they put him in, the not general population. So his mom had died. He dropped out of the gang, and he said, I'm clean now, and everything's really hard. And so we started writing. And so the second book I have is our letters back and forth for the first 3 years that we wrote together. That we wrote back and forth. And I sent it to my editor. I sent the whole manuscript. I wrote the introduction. He wrote the conclusion. The rest is our letters. And she said, did you say this kid hasn't finished high school? And I said, yeah. I said, basically, he finished 5th grade solidly. He finished 8th grade sort of, and then he never went back to school. And she said, then why am I not having to change anything in his writing? His writing's beautiful. She's like, no offense, but I'm having to change more in yours than his. he's natural. And so I've seen him, he's getting his GED, he's changed, and he hasn't, I've been a teacher a long time. I can tell when people are BSing me, he's changed. His demeanor, the way we talk now, he writes me heartfelt things. He's scared to get out, but he's really hopeful, and so the second book is that. And, that's the one, I don't know how to network that. It came out during COVID. But that's the story, that I really want to get out, because he said to me a couple things. He said, I didn't know people like me could write a book. And he said, I didn't know anyone didn't know how hard it was to be someone like me. And by someone like me, he means, a Latino kid whose mom was, undocumented teen mom in Oakland, in the most violent area. And so, all the proceeds of that book go to his grandma, who's his only family left,
that's wonderful.
who he's very, very close to.
Yeah.
But he's just, when he's out, which is 4 years or less, we're hoping for less because they're trying to get the gang enhancement off. When he's out, then I'm just going to try to, connect with everybody I can and let him do speaking, and basically start things and do a little bait and switch. Like, hi, I'm the nice white author here to talk to you. Just kidding. I'm going to sit down here to listen to him.
Well, I got to commend you once again. This is just so heartbreaking, but there's a sense of optimism here that there is a way of possibility of positive light happening. I'm just completely grateful to you for that you have taken the time to do this. I only got one more question for you, because I think that we're probably going to have to chat again. We had some technical difficulties here, but hopefully down the road we'll be able to catch up a little bit more. I would like to ask you what you would like folks to get out of this book that we haven't already discussed. If there is a way to cut through the perhaps jadedness of like, this is what their situation is. It doesn't concern me. I get to move on now with my life.
Right.
How do we reach those people? What do you want your work to say to those people directly?
Right. I wanted to say that if the situation isn't good enough for your son, daughter, nephew, grandkid, then it shouldn't be okay for any school kid. Because everything I write about in my first book, people I know would not let their child be in that situation. And the answer is not what I think the answer that people think is, I'll send them to a private school, I'll send them to a charter school, I'll move into a better school district. If it's not okay for your child, it's not okay for anybody, and we need to fix that. And to fix that, we need to listen to the people who are affected. And just end of story. All the kids belong to all of us. It's not that things are okay for some kids and not others. And then, the other one, which I'd love to have you when he's out of prison, hopefully we can talk again, but, or I'm happy to talk anytime, but, I want people to see incarcerated people as human and see what brought them there, because this child had a whole story that, he was arrested when he was 18 and 2 months, and he had a whole story that brought him there. This was, I guess, the fundamental moral of that book is this was preventable. This was 100% preventable. And, of both books, I want us to stop treating children as disposable. Every child deserves what we think our own children deserve.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, I just want to thank you for having the courage to do this. I know it's difficult to put yourself in that situation, to have the humility to be open about your mistakes and how you're learning to be an ally.
Time to get there.
but at the same time, it's not easy work. So I thank you for the work that you've done and for using your voice to bring awareness to issues that are incredibly important to us and really in the moment that we need to pay attention to them. So let's talk again.
Thank you. I'd love to. It's been a real pleasure. I don't know if you can tell, it brings me so much joy to talk about this. This is just it's such a privilege to be able to have, permission to tell these kids' stories. So anytime, absolutely anytime.
Absolutely. Well, let me bug you a little bit later on, down the road when there's some more developments, but it's been such a blast. And I thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. I'll leave you be, but I'll be in touch real soon.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.